The Grand Hall of the Valoran Empire stretched 300 meters from entrance to throne, its crystalline walls refracting light into patterns that had witnessed 5,000 years of unbroken rule. Today, those walls bore witness to something unprecedented. A human standing in the court of Queen Talara the 18th, sovereign of 7 worlds, voice of the eternal dynasty. James walked between rows of courtiers, whose skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed their emotional states. Right now, those patterns flickered between curiosity and disdain. Humans were a recent addition to the galactic community, their world having achieved faster-than-light travel only 40 standard cycles ago. They were considered primitive, barely worthy of acknowledgement, useful only as laborers on frontier colonies. The queen sat upon her throne of living coral, a structure grown over millennia from the remains of her dynasty's greatest warriors. She wore robes that shifted color with her thoughts, currently a deep violet that suggested amusement. Before her, servants arranged the afternoon banquet, a ritual that preceded the day's diplomatic proceedings. James had been assigned to the human delegation as a cultural attaché, a position that meant he mostly stood quietly while Ambassador Richards negotiated trade agreements. He had studied xenobiology as a hobby during the long journey from Earth, downloading every database the Valorans had been willing to share. What he had learned troubled him deeply. The servants placed the final dish before the queen, a delicacy imported from the recently conquered world of Melos. The creature within the crystalline bowl still moved slightly, its surface glistening with the neural toxins that made it a prized experience for Valoran nobility. The toxin caused euphoric visions in their species, a high that had made the dish worth more than entire cargo ships of precious metals. James broke protocol. He stepped forward from the human delegation's position, his boots clicking on the polished floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Ambassador Richards hissed his name, but James continued walking. "Stop." The queen's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Her guards moved with liquid grace, weapons appearing in their hands. These were not ceremonial pieces, but actual instruments of death, molecular disruptors that could unmake a person atom by atom. James stopped 10 paces from the throne, closer than any human had ever been permitted. He met the queen's gaze directly, another breach of protocol that caused gasps throughout the hall. "Don't consume that food," he said. The hall fell silent. Queen Talara's robes shifted to crimson, a color James had learned meant anger. "A human presumes to instruct the Valoran throne?" Her voice remained level, but the temperature in the hall seemed to drop. "Explain yourself before I have you reduced to component molecules." James swallowed hard, but held his ground. "Your Majesty, I have studied the biological databases your people shared with the human delegation. 3 weeks ago, I noticed an inconsistency in the Melosan export records. That creature before you has been gene-modified." The Queen's chief advisor, a tall Valoran named Kelric, stepped forward. His skin patterns showed orange confusion mixed with red anger. "Impossible. Every import is scanned by our finest biologists. This human knows nothing of our sciences." "I know enough," James said. "The Melosans lost their world to your empire 6 months ago. Their resistance was crushed, their leaders executed. But they're a patient people. They spent those 6 months breeding a variant of this creature that produces a neurotoxin fatal to Valorans, but identical in appearance and taste to the original. The modification is elegant, hidden in genetic sequences that your scanners dismiss as junk material because human biologists only recently discovered their significance." The Queen leaned forward. "You suggest assassination?" "I suggest verification," James replied. "Test the creature. Look specifically at chromosome sequence 7, subsection 42. You'll find a synthetic gene cluster that activates upon exposure to Valoran digestive enzymes." It produces a compound that will cascade through your neural system within minutes. Your biology treats it as a neurotransmitter until it reaches critical mass. Then it becomes poison. Kelrick's patterns flashed pure white, a sign of shock. How could you possibly know this? Because I found the research notes, James said. 3 days ago, I was reviewing intercepted Nalosan communications that your intelligence services had filed as unimportant civilian chatter. One message mentioned the recipe is complete. It seemed odd, so I cross-referenced it with biological databases. Humans are good at pattern recognition. It's how we survived on Earth. We learned to spot the dangerous from the safe, the poisonous from the nutritious. We had to, or we died. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Her robe shifted through several colors, processing the information and implications. Finally, she gestured to her chief scientist, a wizened Valoran, whose patterns had faded with age to a dull silver. "Test it," she commanded. The scientist approached the bowl with instruments that hummed at frequencies beyond human hearing. The court waited in absolute silence. James felt Ambassador Richards's furious glare burning into his back, but he kept his eyes on the Queen. Minutes passed like hours. The scientist's patterns shifted from professional blue to alarmed yellow to horrified white. He turned to the Queen and spoke in a voice that trembled. "The human is correct, Your Majesty. The genetic modification is extraordinarily sophisticated. Our standard scans missed it completely because it masquerades as non-coding material. Upon consumption, you would have had approximately 7 minutes before neural cascade failure." The hall erupted in chaos. Courtiers spoke over each other, their patterns flashing in wild combinations. Guards moved to surround the Queen, weapons trained outward. Kelrick barked orders into a communication device, likely alerting security forces throughout the palace. The Queen raised one hand, and silence returned instantly. She looked at James with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You saved my life, human. Why?" James considered his answer carefully. The wrong words could still get him killed, protocol-breaking hero or not. "Because it was the right thing to do, Your Majesty. And because if you died from Nalosan poison, your empire would have glassed their world in retaliation. Millions would have died. Maybe that's justice in the eyes of some, but it's not justice in mine. You care about the Nalosans?" The Queen's tone suggested genuine curiosity. "They are nothing to your people. They're living beings," James said simply. "That makes them something to me. I don't have to agree with your empire's methods to recognize that genocide serves no one. The Melosans deserve consequences for this attempt, but proportional ones. Justice, not extinction." Queen Talara stood, and the entire court dropped to one knee. James hesitated, then followed suit, hoping it was the right gesture. The Queen descended from her throne and approached him, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. She stopped directly before him. "Rise," she commanded. James stood. Up close, he could see that her eyes were not uniform in color, but contained depths that shifted like storms on a gas giant. She studied him with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. "Humanity joined our community as laborers and curiosities," she said. "We dismissed your species as young and insignificant. But you see patterns we miss. You consider consequences we ignore. You possess a moral framework that prioritizes life over convenience. These are not the traits of a primitive species." She turned to address the court. "Let it be known that the human James Walker is granted the rank of advisor to the throne, with all rights and privileges thereto. Furthermore, I decree that humanity's status is elevated to that of associate members of the Valoran Empire, with full diplomatic standing and trade rights." The court erupted again, this time with a different energy. James felt dizzy with the sudden shift in circumstances. Behind him, Ambassador Richards looked like she might faint from shock. The Queen wasn't finished. And as for the Melozans, they have committed an act of war through deception. But the human speaks wisdom. We will not glass their world. Instead, they will provide reparations, and their leadership will be replaced by a council that includes Melozan voices. Perhaps they can teach us something about patience, and we can teach them about the consequences of patience misapplied. She looked back at James. You have given me 2 gifts today, Advisor Walker. The first is my life. The second is perspective. I have ruled for 30 standard cycles, and in that time, I have never had my assumptions challenged by someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose from speaking truth. This is valuable beyond measure. James found his voice. I just did what any decent person would do, Your Majesty. Precisely, the Queen said, and her robe shifted to a warm gold that suggested approval. You did what any decent person would do. That is exactly my point. Decency, it seems, is not a function of technological advancement or military might. It is a choice, made in moments when silence would be easier. You chose differently. Your species chooses differently. This makes you remarkable. She returned to her throne, gesturing for the poisoned dish to be removed. We have much to discuss, Advisor Walker. But first, we should probably address the small matter of whoever in my kitchen staff allowed this to R.